done it! He has done it! 62!
My favorite part of any sport, whether it be an esport or a conventional sport, is a good story. I love when there are little narratives crafted around a team that usually doesn't win much, but ends up doing really well. This is also known as a Cinderella story. A Cinderella story is a term for a team that usually doesn't win much in the grand scheme of things, but ends up exceeding expectations and achieving greatness, usually in tournaments. The term comes from the old folk tale, Cinderella, the story of a woman whose life turns from a life of poverty to that of massive fortune. But when you break it down, Cinderella is the tale of unjust oppression and triumphant reward. Today, we're going to be looking at 5 different stories of teams that turned what would have been a forgettable talking piece to a legendary epic that would be told for many years to come. Our first story takes us to everyone's favorite state that doesn't exist. Cincinnati, Ohio is the site of our first tale and the professional football team, the Bengals. Since their establishment in 1968, Cincinnati was always known as a mediocre team. The last time they had been to the Super Bowl was 1988, when they lost to the San Francisco 49ers. Well, I guess it was favorable to the other team in Ohio, the Cleveland Browns, who since 1965 have been considered one of the worst teams in the NFL, on the same scale as the New York Jets and the Detroit Lions. But anyway, by 2020, Cincinnati was looking for a change. From 2016 to 2019, they put up a combined win-loss record of 21-42-2, with no appearances in the postseason. This would come in the form of different changes to the team. The first change was parting ways with longtime head coach Marvin Lewis, whose combined win-loss with the team from 2003 to 2018 was 131-122-3, with an 0-7 record in the postseason, all in wildcard games. He wasn't a terrible coach, but after a 6-10 season and finishing outside of playoff contention for the 3rd year in a row, team owner Mike Brown decided to cut him from the team. The next change was to rid themselves of longtime quarterback Andy Dalton, who had been with the team since 2011. Dalton had been a good quarterback for them, but it was clear to Cincinnati that they wanted someone new and younger. Their solution was the third change, the NFL draft. Since Cincinnati finished with the worst record in the NFL the previous season, they got the first pick in the NFL draft. Out of all the players in the draft, one name stood out from the rest. Many had chalked him up to be a generational talent and a must-have for any team. And with the first pick of the 2020 NFL draft, Cincinnati selected LSU quarterback and Athens, Ohio native Joe Burrow. Burrow began his college career at another Ohio team, the Ohio State Buckeyes, who in 2015 were considered the best team in college football, up there with the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Clemson Tigers. The Buckeyes had come off of a 42-20 national championship victory against the Oregon Ducks, who ironically made their own Cinderella run in the playoffs. Burrow would start as the backup to OSU starter, J.T. Barrett. He completed 29 of 39 passes for 287 yards and 2 touchdowns in 2 years. With the 2018-2019 season approaching, Ohio State was in a conundrum with their quarterbacks. They could either go with Burrow and potentially make a run for the national championship, or put all their chips in their third string, Dwayne Haskins. Ultimately, Ohio State went with the latter, and when Barrett graduated, Haskins was moved up to the starting roster. Burrow ended up transferring to LSU, and well, the rest is history. By 2020, Burrow was the most wanted player in the NFL. Coming off of his Heisman-winning national championship season, every team was looking to get him. With Cincinnati being essentially the worst team in the NFL, they drafted Burrow number 1 overall. In their first season, the Bengals did pretty terrible. They had lost 6 out of their first 9 games, with a 23-23 tie against the Philadelphia Eagles. To make matters worse, Burrow would suffer a knee injury in Week 11 that would take him out for the rest of the season. Cincinnati would go on to lose that game and 4 out of their last 6 games of the season, finishing 4-11-1. In the 2021 draft, Cincinnati would select Burrow's LSU teammate, wide receiver Jamar Chase. Cincinnati has something special. They've got themselves a promising young quarterback and a wide receiver, who turns out also played on the same team. You can imagine what happened next. The Bengals finished with a 10-7 record, their best since 2015. They would be matched up with the Las Vegas Raiders in the wild card game. This was the first time since 2014 that they were even in that game. It was a close back and forth game, but after Raiders quarterback Derek Carr threw an interception to linebacker Jermaine Pratt with 12 seconds left, the 66,000 strong home crowd in Cincinnati erupted in cheers. The Bengals had just won a playoff game for the first time in 31 years. Their next game would be another tight one against the South Divisional winner, the Tennessee Titans. Headed by former Crimson Tide running back Derrick Henry, this was not going to be an easy game. The game was another back and forth match, with it coming down to the fourth quarter. With 4 seconds left in the game, rookie kicker Evan McPherson was brought out to send Cincinnati to the conference finals, a game which they hadn't even played in since 1988. As McPherson stared down the upright, standing 52 yards away from him, most of us could only imagine what kind of pressure he was under. But nonetheless, the former Florida kicker took the snap and drilled it right through. Just 2 weeks later, they were nearly 600 miles west at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City. Their conference championship opponents were the Kansas City Chiefs, who were just 2 years removed from a Super Bowl championship and were also Super Bowl finalists in the previous year. In the past few years, most people can agree that out of all the NFL teams, the Chiefs are one of the best out there. After Kansas City got out to a 21-10 lead at halftime, most people expected them to coast to yet another Super Bowl appearance. Unbeknownst to the 73,000 in attendance that day, Cincinnati was not going down easily.
Goals made. Move past Gostkowski's 8 as a rookie. He's got 9. Looking for a 10th from 31 yards, and it is good. The rookie, 10 for 10. In a touchdown and a 2 away from tying it.
This is where Uzama would be huge, but you can use your running back. The guy's inside, but you got to get it out.
There he is to the end zone, and he comes down with it. Outrageous. What a catch. Chase, one-on-one. Forget about it. Seconds remaining. 52 yards away. Can he do it from 52 again? This kick is good.
Oh, Jay, he didn't have any scars coming in. And that...
Can he do it again? Can he tie it in regulation? And yes, he can.
Wow, both quarterbacks got one crack at it.
With the game knotted up at 24, the game was sent into overtime, with Kansas City getting the ball to start. Per NFL rules, the first team to score in overtime wins the game. And so, Kansas City's offense went out onto the field. Just 3 plays later, quarterback Patrick Mahomes threw a lob ball down the sideline that was batted and intercepted by safety Von Bell. After the Bengals went on an 8-play drive, Evan McPherson was once again sent out onto the field to send the Bengals to the Super Bowl. McPherson took the field and lined up from 31 yards. When the chips were down and with his back against the wall, McPherson took the snap and delivered.
From 31 yards, McPherson, and Cincinnati is heading to the Super Bowl.
He called it again, I'm sure. He walked up and he goes, "Can you believe, Coach? We're going to the Super Bowl." And they did it. They beat Mahomes at home. Wow, Joe Burrow.
Cincinnati would go on to lose the Super Bowl against the Los Angeles Rams 23-20, but nonetheless, a statement had been made to the NFL and to the world that the Bengals were ready for the future, and it didn't look quite too bad for them. But, of course, we'll just have to see. Our next Cinderella Run takes us to the Red Land. Shanghai, China is the venue for the 2020 League of Legends World Championship. 16 of the world's best teams are vying for the sport's greatest prize, the Summoners Cup. Among these teams is one that is different from the others. Suning is a team from China's LPL League. Beginning in 2017, they competed as an average team, barely cracking the top 4 at some times. That all would change in the 2020 spring split when the team signed young AD carry Huan Feng, and after existing jungler turned AD carry Wei Wei was loaned out to another LPL team, Victory 5, Huan Feng was given a full spot on the main roster for the 2020 summer split. With the roster of top laner Bin, jungler SOFM, mid laner Angel, AD carry Huan Feng, and support Sword Art, the team would go 12-4, their best record up to that point. In the playoffs, they would defeat, ironically, Victory 5 3-1. They would get swept by Top Esports 3-1 in the next round, but defeated LGD 3-0 in the third place match to get a chance at being LPL's third seed at Worlds. In order to do that, Suning would have to run it back against LGD in another series. If they won, they would qualify for their first Worlds in organization history, which they would do 3-0. Since Suning was LPL's third seed, they would get an instant pass into the main group stage. They would be placed in Group A along with European champions G2 Esports, North American play-in qualifiers Team Liquid, and PCS representative Machi Esports. At first, Suning would start off on the wrong foot, losing to G2 in their first game. They would pick back up by defeating Team Liquid once and Machi Esports twice. Liquid would then get revenge on Suning, handing them their second loss of the group stage, but at that point, Suning was already looking to be a top contender for Group A. After Suning got revenge on G2 to go 4-2, they would have to play G2 again in a tiebreaker to determine who the top seed from Group A would be. Although the kills were kept close, Suning would snowball a gold lead that would lead them to winning with an 11,000 gold lead. And so, Suning were established as the first seed from Group A. In the knockouts, Suning was put up against the second seed from Group B and LPL's runner-ups, JDG Gaming. This was an extremely talented team, headed by former Griffin jungler Kanavi and former Royal Club support LV Mao. JDG were obviously the favorites going into the series, and it seemed that it was going to be that way, as they defeated Suning in Game 1. However, in a turn of events that could only be described as indescribable, Suning ended up winning 3 straight to clinch their spot in the semifinals, where they would have to face Top Esports. They were the LPL champions of that split. They had a lot of superstar talent, most notably jungler Karsa, who was with the MSI winning squad with RNG and AD carry Uzi. Mid laner Knight, who ironically had played on Suning back in early 2018, and AD carried Jackie Love, who was on the World Championship winning squad with Invictus Gaming back in 2018. Top had also beaten Suning in the summer playoffs 3-0. This was going to be a close one with the LPL champions and the Cinderella of that Worlds.
Waiting for Carson to go in. 1k health is going to be claimed by SOFM, and Carson down to 800. In comes Bin for the knockup. Doug puts him away. Looks for the re-engage on the back line. They've shut down Jackie Love. Bin doing the heavy lifting. Can he do the rest? He puts the team into it. Knight flashes the way to the wrong side of the map, and a shot. Jungler's nowhere nearby. Carson does not have a real smite. Drops aggro. The second one falls, and now it's the time for the desperation defense. They're going to try 2 versus 4. Already a kill comes through. Another one comes in, but the Nexus will fall.
On top of that stacked Medjai's, by the way.
Oh, but it might not be 15 stacks anymore. He's going to find himself slowed. Shockwave on 3, still killed off. Sort out the target. Karsa going to go bowling yet again, but is it going to be enough? The barrels. It's 800 damage and a flash follow. And Karsa's here. Can he find the kill on his old teammate? They played 2 on target, but you don't want to go for tank Bard. They will knock down the turrets, and they will go for the Nexus itself. But Angel is not finding any damage. Ben is back on the fountain, and Top Esports know they have done the job. Tied the series 1-1, and we got a seal. No knockup, but it's not for Huanfeng. He finds one, looks for another. They're gonna get Jackie Love. There is no damage left. Knight has to do it all. They get Angel. He's got to run. Knight has to run. Karsa has to try. Can they get the damage? No one else is on the base. It is just a 3v3. Karsa drops. It's Karsa running away, but Knight is already gone, and this could be enough. Huanfeng tries to take down 369 and does so. Karsa is gone as well. That is the ace. EES and the hopes of the LPL will rest with Suning.
What an exciting team to watch. What an exciting story to...
Their final opponents would be the formidable Damwon Gaming. This was a squad that had dominated Korea's LCK region, going 16-2 and dropping no games to DRX in the playoffs. This squad boasted a roster with many stars, including top laner Nuggery, jungler Canyon, breakout mid laner Showmaker, veteran AD carry Ghost, and support Beryl. But surely there couldn't be another team in this video that lost when the time was right. Come on, show me the money.
Shut down Suning! Damwon will silence Shanghai! And Damwon Gaming are your season 2020 world champions!
Suning would lose to Damwon 3-1, but at least they won Game 2, even if it didn't matter. Suning has since dissolved into a new organization, Weibo Gaming, and despite having pretty much the same roster with the exception of former Invictus Gaming top laner The Shy and new support ON, the team hasn't really done much other than finish around the middle of the region where they were before. I guess that's how all Cinderellas are destined to go, back to mediocrity. But what happens if they don't? Our next tale takes us to the bustling city of Chicago, Illinois, and to a school with a little over 17,000 enrolled. Loyola Chicago University is a school just north of the city. Since 1985, the Ramblers had not seen any playing time in the college basketball March Madness tournament. That all was about to change in 2018 when Loyola Chicago was selected as the 11th seed in the South region of the tournament, adding on to an already historical season for the Ramblers. They had finished with a 28-5 record, their best since their 1962-1963 season, when they won the national championship. 55 years later, Loyola Chicago was back in the playoffs. They did have a couple appearances since then, but they had been either first round or third round losses. Headed by team scoring leaders, juniors Clayton Custer and Marcus Towns, and seniors Dante Ingram and Andre Jackson, the Ramblers were looking to do something that had not been done in over half a century. Their first opponent were the Miami Hurricanes, who finished their season at 22-9 and were the 6th seed in the South. Although the game was back and forth, it came down to literally the last seconds. As the time winded down, Loyola was unable to put up a layup, and after Miami guard Lonnie Walker rebounded with 9.3 seconds left, he was fouled by Towns. After Walker missed a free throw, it was rebounded by Towns, who then gave it to guard Mike Robinson, who took it down the court and then flipped it to Jaquan Newton from the top of the key. What happened next was probably not expected by anyone, but it was clear to everyone that was watching the game that Thursday evening. It was madness. Even though Loyola had beaten Miami, there were still 5 games left, and Virginia, one of the favorites to win the tournament, were going to be in one of those games, right?
The superlatives, you can't come up with enough. Absolute. Incredible performance. Shock and awe in college basketball. UNBC makes history in Charlotte.
A little over 24 hours after Loyola's win, Virginia would get smoked 74-54 by the 16th seeded UMBC Retrievers. This marked the first time in the tournament's history that a 16th seed had beaten a first seed. With Virginia out of the tournament, it was going to make Loyola Chicago's run a lot more easier. Still difficult, but stomachable. Their next foe were the 3rd seeded 25-8 Tennessee Volunteers, who had just come off of a 73-47 wallop of Wright State University. Headed by future NBA Celtics player Grant Williams, and also boasting 2 more future NBA picks in Admiral Schofield and Jordan Bone, this team was not going to go down without a fight, if they even had to, seeing as they were favored by 6.5. This one would be another nail-biter. After getting fouled when making a layup, Tennessee's Williams would make a free throw, which was then inbounded to Loyola's Custer, who took it up the court, and then, well, you literally can't make this up even if you tried.
MVP, right? Of the Missouri Valley Conference. You talk about a big-time shot, and he had.
Tennessee would miss a buzzer beater of their own, and Loyola Chicago would be sent to the regional semifinals for the first time since 1985. Their opponents were Nevada, who retrospectively were on their own Cinderella run during this time. They had previously beaten the 30-4 second-ranked Cincinnati Bearcats. Around this time, the sports media would start to pick up on the school from Illinois, who had now won not 1, but 2 games in a row off last-second buzzer beaters. And so, on that March evening, thousands crowded into the State Farm Arena and millions tuned in at home to see if Loyola Chicago would continue the improbable run. Although this game would be close in the first half, Loyola would jump out to a 12-point lead early in the second. Nevada would close the gap to just 2, and after Marcus Towns drilled a 3-pointer with 6.2 seconds left, Loyola Chicago would hold on to advance to the Elite 8. Their next opponents would be the 25-12 9th-ranked Kansas State Wildcats. They made it this far and looked like they would not give up. Would Loyola Chicago hold on and do something that had not been done in over 50 years? This game wasn't even close. By halftime, Loyola had gotten out to a 36-24 lead, and at one point had held a 59-38 lead with 10:49 left in the game. By the end of it, everyone around the country knew who the team to watch was. Their next foes would be the toughest team they had faced so far. The third-ranked 28-7 Michigan Wolverines, hailing from Ann Arbor, would be the final test to get into the national championship. This was a team who, frankly, shouldn't have been there at all. Just 3 games ago, Michigan were facing the 6th-ranked Houston Cougars. After future NBA champion Jordan Poole sunk a 3-point buzzer beater to send Michigan ahead, they would go on to smoke Texas A&M and win close against Florida State to face the Cinderella team from Chicago. Unfortunately for our protagonists, this is where the glass slipper broke.
Comes the trap. Weak sides open, pull. That's a nice drag. With 2 more, and another touch again has the edge here. Matthews swings it over. Wagner's touch. Yeah, Michigan out of gate. Very free throw team. Look at this stuff up ahead. Matthews. Fantastic run it was, but it's Michigan taking the semi-final game, 69-57.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, Michigan went on to get smoked by defending champions Villanova in the championship game. Since that loss to Michigan, Loyola Chicago has had a combined win-loss of 92-38, with 2 more appearances in the March Madness tournament. So maybe things are looking up for the Ramblers. I don't think we'll see another run like this, but we almost got there just this past March with St. Peter's. So maybe it's more probable than people think. For our next story, we'll have to go back a bit. It's the 1980s, and in America, the Olympics are happening. Lake Placid, New York is the site of the 1980 Olympic men's ice hockey playoffs. In one corner is the United States, and their opponents were the Soviet Union. The 1980s were a different time in America than that of the present day. During this time, Cold War tensions were at their highest, which came after a period of détente. This era of time between the late 1970s and early 1980s came to be known as the New Cold War. During this time, both the United States and Soviet Union were igniting nuclear war tensions, although not as intense. Instead, the United States responded to the Soviet Union indirectly by supporting the opposition in proxy wars around the world, most notably the Soviet-Afghan War. In September of 1979, Mir Mohammad Taraki, the Chalkiyist president, was assassinated from a coup done within the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. A fellow party member, Hafizullah Amin, assumed the presidency, who was then assassinated by Soviet special forces during a mission known as Operation Storm-333. Their goal, which was met, was to install a Soviet government in Afghanistan. The United States president at this time, Jimmy Carter, responded by withdrawing the SALT II treaty, imposing embargoes, and, most important to our story, boycotting the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow. In response, rather than boycotting the Winter Olympics in Lake Placid later that year, the Soviets decided that they would rather embarrass their geopolitical foes in their own country. And so, the Winter Olympics kicked off on February 13, 1980. Out of all the sports in the Winter Olympics, none had a dynasty won more than the Soviets on ice hockey. They had won 5 out of the last 6 previous gold medals and were once more favored to win. In the 4 Olympics that preceded their bronze finish at Squaw Valley, the Soviets toasted their opponents with a combined win-loss of 27-1-1 and outscored their opponents 175-44. The team featured some of the best players in the world at the time, like team captain right winger Boris Mikhailov, forwards Vladimir Krutov and Sergei Makarov, defensive men Vyacheslav Fetisov and Vladislav Tretiak, who in 1980 was considered the best goaltender in the game of ice hockey. The Soviet Union had been placed in a group with Finland, Canada, Poland, Netherlands, and Japan. Given their reign of dominance, it was clear who the frontrunners were, and it seemed that way, as in their first game, the Soviets blasted Japan 16-0. They then blasted Netherlands 17-4, and then Poland 8-1. They finished the group with 2 last matches that were more close, 2-4 against Finland and 6-4 against Canada. Combining each game, the Soviets exited the group stage with a staggering 51 goals scored and 11 given up. While the Soviets had the best in the world, the United States had fielded a group of entirely amateurs. Head coach Herb Brooks had coached the University of Minnesota and had poached a bunch of his players into the team and from other schools. His tryout was a 300 questionnaire that would determine how each player would perform under immense stress. Any player that refused the test would automatically fail. 9 players would be poached from the University of Minnesota, including left wing Rob McClanahan, defensive mid Mike Ramsey, and forward Phil Furchada. 4 more were poached from Boston University, including team captain left wing Mike Eruzione and goaltender Jim Craig. The United States had been placed in a group with Sweden, Czechoslovakia, Romania, West Germany, and Norway. They drew first with Sweden 2-2, but then crushed Czech and Norway 7-3 and 5-1 respectively. Romania was then handled 7-2, and finally West Germany was beaten 4-2. Combining the scores, the United States scored 26 goals and gave up 7. Not bad for a bunch of kids. Both teams had gone undefeated in the group stage and were set to match on February 22nd at 5 p.m. ABC had actually protested that they wanted the game to air at 8 p.m. EST, 3 hours later, as to put it in their primetime block for higher viewership. But the Soviets argued that it meant the game would air 4 a.m. Moscow time. Instead, the game was tape delayed to be aired primetime. However, to this day, some people still believe that the game was aired live. Just something to think about. Anyway, since those Squaw Valley Olympics, the Soviets have outscored the US 28-7 with no losses. With the 8,500 packed into the arena, this is what took place.
Against the Soviets. Buzz Snyder. Losing it, out to the point. Slap shot, and it was deflected in from the point. The Soviet Union takes a 1-0 lead, taking it away for the U.S. Pavlich up ahead to Snyder. Slap shot goes in for Snyder. Skates in over the blue line to Sportsov. Sportsov gets by Christian. Craig makes the save, and then the rebound goes wide. Number 23, leaving it for Makarov. He tried to get it back to goal. Komp then gets it back and scores. Deflected off the American defenseman, and the Soviets take the lead 2-1. That made it 1-0. Long shot, the easy save by Tretiak, but Johnson is there and scores with 1 second to play in the period. Right now the clock shows nothing, but it was stopped at 1 when we looked up as the goal was scored. Right now it shows nothing as the period apparently has come to an end, but the United States has tied the game.
By the end of the first period, the Soviets and the Americans were tied. Most people had not expected the Americans to be this close to the Soviets. In an action that would go on to haunt the Soviets, coach Viktor Tikhonov decided to pull the greatest goalkeeper in the world for the backup, Vladimir Mishkin. The Soviets allowed no goals during the second period, outshooting the Americans 12-2 and scoring 2 minutes and 18 seconds into play after Alexander Maltsev scored during a Soviet power play. The Soviets went into the second intermission with a 3-2 lead. The third period is when it all got real. You know, this has to be one of the best moments in sports. For the glorious United States to defeat the despicable Soviet Union. For the past 30 years, the Soviet Union and the United States butted heads with each other, and at one point, almost going to nuclear Armageddon. It always seemed that the Soviet Union wanted to be above the Americans, and it seemed that way. Nowadays, everyone is just so cynical and pessimistic. It seems like everyone hates America and the people inside of it. But for one moment, over 40 years ago, everyone was proud to be American.
Right now, Morrow up to Silk. 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
If the United States, a team with only college players, could pull off a miracle on ice against the powerful Soviet Union ice hockey team who had mostly legendary players who were the best in their sport, what else could possibly happen? Our last Cinderella story takes us back to the city of Chicago. As much as the Chicago Cubs won, it always seemed that they were cursed. On October 6, 1945, Billy Goat Tavern owner William Cyanis was watching the game with his pet goat Billy. After Billy started to bother other fans, the two were kicked out of the stadium. Angered, Cyanis remarked that the Cubs would never win again, referring to the Cubs not winning the National League pennant ever again. For the past 71 years before 2016, Cyanis' curse had proven correct, as the Cubs had failed to win a pennant. The last time the Cubs had won the World Series was 1908, 102 years prior to 2016. This year, the Cubs seemed to be a contender, winning 103 games, the most since 1910, when they lost the World Series against the Philadelphia Athletics. There had been people who had been born and had died without seeing the Chicago Cubs win a World Series. The Cubs had a lot of expectations on them, being placed at the top of a lot of power rankings lists. Their young roster boasted many stars, including hitting leaders first baseman Anthony Rizzo and third baseman Chris Bryant, and their older catchers Miguel Montero and David Ross. It started at Wrigley against the San Francisco Giants. After a scoreless 8.5 innings, Javier Baez came up to bat in the bottom of the 8th. After gaining a full count, he proceeded to blast one down in left field to break the 0-0 tie. The Cubs would hold on to win Game 1. In Game 2, Chicago would get out to a 4-run lead in the bottom of the 2nd. San Francisco would cut the lead to half, but after Travis Wood blasted another home run to left field, the Cubs would hold on to win 5-2. The Cubs would lose the next game when it came to Oracle, and it would seem that they would lose again. Up 5-2 at the bottom of the 9th, the Giants proceeded to give up a 3-run lead as the Cubs rallied to take the lead at 6-5 and win the series 3-1. The next opponents would be the Los Angeles Dodgers, who had made 7 playoff appearances in the last 10 years. Once again, the series kicked off at Wrigley. The Cubs jumped out to a 3-run lead going into the top of the 5th. Ethier then drilled one to left center to cut the lead to 2. Adrian Gonzalez would then hit a 2-run RBI to tie the game. During the bottom, Miguel Montero walked up to the plate down 2 outs. On an 0-2 count with the bases loaded, this is what happened next.
Here comes the 0-2.
Literally the pitch right after, Dexter Fowler homered one in the same area where Montero had just homered, extending the lead to 8-3. The Dodgers would score another run in the top of the 9th, but they would still lose. 1-0 Cubs.
Broken bat should end it. It does. Dodgers win 1-0, and they've split the first 2 games of this NLCS in Chicago. Caught. Turner. Dodgers win Game 3, 6-0.
It seemed for a second that the Cubs' series was going to end. The Dodgers just had their number. They would go to the World Series, and history would probably be different. Or would it?
Seager grounds to the left side. That's Bryant. Series is tied. Cubs win it 10-2.
The Cubs would crush the Dodgers in the next 2 games, and with the series going back to Wrigley for Game 6, something magical was on the horizon. It starts with an RBI single by Chris Bryant, 1-0 Cubs. Ben Zobrist would RBI Bryant in to make it 2-0 Cubs. Bottom of the 2nd, Dexter Fowler hits one to left with one coming in, making it 3-0 Cubs. 2 innings later, Wilson Contreras would boom one into left, 4-0 Cubs. 1 inning later, Rizzo booms one to center right, 5-0 Cubs. All they have to do is not blow it, and they've broken the curse.
Left side. Out. The Cubs have won the pennant.
For the first time since 1945, the Chicago Cubs were National League champions. The curse of the Billy Goat had been broken. Now, all that was left was the World Series. It turns out that Cleveland does have a good professional team, as their opponents were the Cleveland Indians. Game 1 would start at Progressive. Cleveland would start out with a 2-run lead thanks to 2 one-run RBIs by Jose Ramirez and Brandon Guerrier respectively. Roberto Perez would homer 1 to left center and then would do the same in the 8th, bringing in 2 more with him. With the Cubs being shut out in Game 1, it didn't look good for them. Game 2 would see Chicago start to fight back, getting out to a 5-run lead going into the 6th. Although Jason Kipnis would score off of a wild pitch, the Cubs held on to tie the series. The next 2 games were not pretty for the Cubs. Game 3 at Wrigley would be an 0-0 tie until Coco Crisp hit an RBI single to right. The Indians would hold on to that lead and go ahead in the series 2-1. Game 4 saw the Indians get out to a 4-1 lead that would then be blown wide open with a Kipnis 3-run homer that would put the Indians ahead 7-1. Fowler would then homer to cut the lead to 5, but the Indians held on to make the series 3-1. It turns out the Indians were trying to break their own curse, as they hadn't won a World Series of their own since 1948, 68 years ago, although it seemed that it was going to end going into Game 5. With all the momentum in the way of the Indians, it seemed that the Cubs' misfortune would continue for just a little bit longer. Many Cinderella runs have come and many have gone. I have shown stories of happiness, heartbreak, adversity, and hardship. But honestly, I find this one to be the most memorable. As someone not from in or around Chicago, I find this to still be a glorious sight. For over half a century, one baseball team had not won a championship. There had been hundreds of players who had come and gone throughout the years, and possibly tens or perhaps even hundreds of thousands of fans, and not one of them had seen a World Series win from their beloved team. This run embodies the story of Cinderella perfectly, a story of unjust oppression and triumphant reward. So if the Chicago Cubs could do something that had not been done since before World War I think it's even a little bit special. Don't you think?
This is going to be a tough play. Bryant, the Cubs